Have you ever had one of those days where you wake up and before your feet even touch the floor, you already feel tired?
Not just physically tired, but something deeper, like your energy is already gone, even though the day hasn't even started yet.
And you tell yourself, maybe I just need coffee, maybe I didn't sleep well, maybe today will get better, but somehow that tired feeling quietly follows you through the entire day.
It stays with you while you're working, while you're talking to people, even when you're trying to relax. And by the evening, instead of feeling satisfied, you just feel drained and a little confused about where all your energy went.
If you've ever felt like that, I want you to know something very important. You're not alone, and more importantly, there is a reason behind it.
Because feeling tired all the time is not always about sleep, and that's something most people don't realize for a very long time.
I used to think that if I just slept more hours, everything would be fine. But even on days when I slept 8 or 9 hours, I would still wake up feeling heavy, unmotivated, and strangely disconnected from my day.
And that's one of the most frustrating feelings because you're doing what you think is right. You're resting, you're trying, but the result doesn't match your effort.
Exactly. And that's where the confusion begins, because you start questioning yourself. Why am I like this? Why can't I feel energetic like other people? Why does everything feel harder than it should?
And slowly, without realizing it, that tiredness starts affecting more than just your body. It begins to affect your mood, your focus, your confidence, and even the way you see your life.
I remember a time in my life when I felt constantly tired. And not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, constant way, like a background noise that never really stopped.
What did that feel like for you?
It felt like I was always trying to catch up with my own energy. Like no matter how much I rested, I could never fully feel refreshed or ready.
That's such a powerful way to describe it, trying to catch up with your own energy.
Yes, and it made even simple things feel difficult, like starting work, focusing on a conversation, or even doing things I used to enjoy.
Did you think it was normal at that time?
At first, yes, I thought maybe this is just what adult life feels like. Being tired, being busy, always feeling a little behind.
A lot of people believe that, and that belief can be very dangerous because it makes you accept something that isn't actually healthy.
Exactly. And when you accept it, you stop questioning it. And when you stop questioning it, you stop looking for solutions.
And that's when tiredness becomes your normal, even though it shouldn't be.
But then one day, something small made me pause and think differently.
What happened?
I was sitting in a cafe and I noticed a woman at the table next to me, and there was something about her energy that stood out. She looked calm, focused, and present, not rushed, not exhausted.
And that made you reflect.
Yes, because I realized that I hadn't felt like that in a long time, and it made me ask myself a simple but uncomfortable question. Why do I feel so different?
That's a powerful moment because awareness often begins with comparison, not in a negative way, but in a curious way.
Exactly, and that curiosity became the beginning of change for me.
What did you start noticing after that?
I started noticing my daily habits, not just the big ones, but the small ones that I never paid attention to before.
Because energy is not only affected by big actions, but also by small, repeated patterns.
Yes, and one of the first things I noticed was how I was starting my day.
What was your morning like?
It was rushed, distracted, and honestly a bit chaotic. Because the first thing I would do after waking up was reach for my phone.
That's very common.
I would scroll through messages, check notifications, read random things, and before I even got out of bed, my mind was already full.
And that affects your energy more than people realize.
Yes, because instead of starting my day calmly, I was starting it with noise, information, and pressure.
It's like your mind doesn't get a chance to wake up naturally.
Exactly. And I didn't notice it at first, but over time, it created a constant sense of mental fatigue.
That's such an important point because many people think tiredness is only physical, but mental fatigue can be just as strong, sometimes even stronger.
And the worst part is that mental fatigue is harder to recognize because you can still be moving, working, and doing things, but inside you feel drained.
I had a similar experience, but in my case, it was more connected to my work habits.
What do you mean?
I used to work for long hours without real breaks, and I believed that the more time I spent working, the more productive I was.
That sounds logical, but it's not always true.
Exactly. Because after a certain point, my focus would drop, my energy would decrease, and I would start making simple mistakes.
So even though you were working more, you were actually achieving less.
Yes, and at the end of the day, I felt exhausted, but not satisfied.
That combination is really difficult, being tired but not fulfilled.
It creates a cycle because the next day you start again with low energy and the pattern continues.
So what helped you break that cycle?
For me, it started with understanding that energy is something you need to manage, not just hope for.
That's such an important shift, from expecting energy to creating it.
Yes, and once I understood that, I started paying attention to what was giving me energy and what was taking it away.
And what did you discover?
That many of my habits were quietly draining me, not in an obvious way, but slowly throughout the day.
That's the key word, quietly.
Yes, because if something is loud or dramatic, you notice it immediately. But when it's subtle, it becomes part of your normal life.
And that's why so many people feel tired without understanding why.
Exactly, because the cause isn't one big thing, it's many small things.
And those small things are often easy to ignore.
Until they start affecting your life in a bigger way.
So if you're listening right now and you feel tired more often than you should, I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself something very simple.
Not a complicated question.
Just a quiet, honest one.
Just an honest one that's quietly an honest one.
What might be draining my energy without me noticing it?
Because that question can change everything.
Not instantly, but slowly.
And that's how real change begins.
Not with big dramatic steps.
But with small awareness.
And once you start seeing clearly,
you can start choosing differently.
And that's where your energy begins to come back to you.
Once you begin asking that simple question, what is quietly draining my energy? Something interesting starts to happen.
You begin to notice things that you never paid attention to before. Small patterns, small reactions, small habits that felt completely normal.
And at first, it can feel a little uncomfortable because you realize that the tiredness you feel is not just happening to you. It's being shaped by your daily choices.
I remember when that realization first hit me. It wasn't dramatic, but it was very clear, like suddenly seeing something that had always been in front of me.
What did you notice first?
I noticed how I was ending my day, because we often focus so much on how we start the day, but the way we end it matters just as much.
That's a powerful point, because your evening shapes your next morning.
Exactly. And my evenings were not restful at all, even though I thought they were, because I would spend hours scrolling, watching random videos, or just staying mentally engaged without even realizing it.
So your body was resting, but your mind wasn't.
Yes, and that made a huge difference, because even when I went to sleep, my mind felt busy, almost like it hadn't had a chance to slow down.
That's something many people experience, but they don't connect it to the tiredness the next day.
Exactly. And I used to tell myself, I'm relaxing, but in reality, I was just distracting myself.
There's a big difference between rest and distraction.
Yes, rest actually gives you energy back, while distraction often just delays your exhaustion.
That's such an important idea, because many people think they are resting, but they are actually just switching from one form of stimulation to another.
And over time, that constant stimulation keeps your mind active, even when your body is tired.
I experienced something similar, but in a slightly different way.
What was it like for you?
I realized that I wasn't giving myself any real breaks during the day, because even when I stopped working, I would immediately check my phone or start thinking about the next task.
So your mind never had a moment of silence.
Exactly. And without silence, your mind doesn't recover.
That's something we often forget, that mental recovery is just as important as physical rest.
Yes, and without it, you carry mental fatigue from one moment to the next, and by the end of the day, it feels like everything is heavier than it should be.
I think one of the biggest shifts for me was learning to create small moments of real rest during the day.
What do you mean by real rest?
Moments where I wasn't consuming anything, no phone, no music, no distractions, just sitting, breathing, or simply being present.
That sounds simple, but it's actually very powerful.
It is, because it gives your mind a chance to slow down. And when your mind slows down, your energy begins to return.
And those moments don't have to be long.
Not at all. Even a few minutes can make a difference if you're truly present.
That's something I had to learn slowly, because at first, doing nothing felt uncomfortable.
Yes, because we're so used to constant stimulation.
Exactly. But over time, I began to enjoy those quiet moments because they made everything else feel easier.
And that's when you realize that energy is not only about doing more, it's also about allowing yourself to pause.
There's another thing I noticed that was affecting my energy in a deeper way.
What was it?
The way I was thinking about my responsibilities. Because I used to carry everything in my head, even when I wasn't actively working.
That sounds exhausting.
It was, because even when I was resting, part of my mind was still thinking about what I had to do next, what I hadn't finished, or what might go wrong.
So you were never fully present in the moment.
Exactly. And that created a constant background stress that I didn't even notice at first.
That kind of stress is very subtle, but very powerful.
Yes, because it doesn't feel intense, but it's always there, slowly draining your energy.
So how did you start changing that?
I started writing things down instead of keeping them in my head.
That's such a simple habit, but it can make a big difference.
It really did, because once I wrote them down, I didn't have to keep thinking about them all the time.
It gave your mind space.
Yes, and that space reduced my mental fatigue.
I had a similar experience when I started simplifying my day.
What do you mean by simplifying?
I stopped trying to do too many things in one day because I realized that having a long list of tasks was making me feel overwhelmed before I even started.
That's very true, because too many tasks can create pressure instead of motivation.
Exactly. And that pressure was draining my energy even before I began working.
So what did you change?
I started choosing fewer tasks, but focusing on them more deeply.
And how did that feel?
It felt lighter, calmer, and surprisingly more productive.
Because you were not spreading your energy too thin.
Yes, and I could actually finish things, which gave me a sense of progress and satisfaction.
That feeling of completion is very important for your energy.
It really is, because unfinished tasks create mental weight.
And that weight follows you throughout the day.
So when you reduce that weight, you naturally feel more energetic.
All of this shows something very important,
That tiredness is not always about doing too much.
but often about how we're doing things.
And how we're thinking about them.
Because your energy is shaped by both your actions and your mindset.
And once you begin to understand that,
You stop blaming yourself.
and start observing yourself,
And that shift changes everything.
because observation leads to awareness.
And awareness leads to change.
And that change, even if it's small,
Can slowly bring your energy back,
one day at a time.
one habit at a time.
There's something else that took me a long time to understand. And honestly, when I finally saw it clearly, it changed the way I looked at my tiredness completely.
What was it?
The connection between emotions and energy.
That's a deep one.
Yes, because we often think of tiredness as something physical or mental, but we forget how much our emotions affect how we feel.
That's so true. Because you can sleep well, eat well, and still feel exhausted if something is weighing on you emotionally.
Exactly. And for a long time, I ignored that part of myself because it's not as easy to see or measure.
What kind of emotions were affecting you?
Mostly stress, but not always obvious stress. More like a quiet pressure that I was carrying without realizing it.
What kind of pressure?
The pressure to do everything right, to be productive, to not fall behind, to keep up with expectations, even the ones I created in my own mind.
That can be very draining.
It really was, because even when I was resting, part of me felt like I should be doing something else.
So you never felt fully at ease.
Exactly, and that constant inner tension slowly took away my energy.
That's something many people experience, but they don't connect it to their tiredness.
Yes, because it becomes normal, like background noise.
And when something becomes normal, we stop questioning it.
But once I started paying attention to it, I realized that my mind was rarely calm.
Even in quiet moments.
Especially in quiet moments, because that's when all the thoughts would come in.
That can feel overwhelming.
It did, and I used to escape that feeling by distracting myself, but that only made things worse in the long run.
Because the emotions don't disappear. They just, wait,
Exactly, and they come back later, often stronger.
So, what helped you deal with that?
I started allowing myself to feel those emotions instead of avoiding them.
That's not easy.
No, it's not, but it's necessary because when you stop running from your thoughts and feelings, they lose some of their power over you.
And how did that affect your energy?
It made me feel lighter because I was no longer carrying everything inside me all the time.
That makes sense. Because emotional weight can be just as heavy as physical weight.
Yes, and once that weight starts to lift, your energy naturally begins to return.
I had a similar realization, but it came through a different experience.
What happened?
I noticed that I was saying yes to too many things, even when I didn't really want to.
That's very common.
I wanted to be helpful, responsible, and reliable, but I didn't realize how much it was draining me.
Because every yes takes energy.
Exactly. And when you keep saying yes without thinking, you end up giving your time and energy away without protecting it.
So, what changed for you?
I started pausing before saying yes and asking myself, do I really have the energy for this?
That's such a powerful question.
It is, because it forces you to be honest with yourself.
And sometimes the honest answer is no.
Yes, and learning to say no was difficult at first, but it gave me back a lot of energy.
Because you are no longer overcommitting yourself.
Exactly. And I began to feel more in control of my time and my energy.
That's such an important connection, control and energy.
Yes, because when you feel like your time is not yours, it naturally drains you.
And when you start protecting your time, your energy improves.
There's also something else I noticed that was affecting my energy in a subtle way.
What was it?
The way I was talking to myself.
That's a big one.
I didn't realize it at first, but my inner voice was often negative, critical, and demanding.
That can be very exhausting.
It was, because even when I was doing my best, it never felt like enough.
So you were constantly pushing yourself mentally.
Yes, and that constant pressure drained my energy.
So how did you change that?
I started becoming aware of my thoughts and gently changing the way I spoke to myself.
In what way?
Instead of saying, you're not doing enough, I would say, you're doing what you can, and that's okay.
That's a much kinder approach.
Yes, and surprisingly, it made me feel more motivated, not less.
Because kindness creates energy, while pressure drains it.
Exactly.
I experienced something similar when I stopped comparing myself to others.
That can be very draining.
It really is, because when you compare your life, your progress, or your energy to someone else's, you create unnecessary pressure.
And that pressure affects how you feel.
Yes, and it makes you feel like you're always behind, even when you're not.
So, what changed?
I started focusing more on my own pace, my own needs, my own energy.
That brings a sense of calm.
It does, because you're no longer trying to match someone else's rhythm.
You're creating your own.
And that makes a huge difference in how you feel every day.
All of this shows something very important.
That tiredness is not just physical.
It's emotional and mental too.
And if you only focus on sleep or rest,
You might miss the deeper causes.
but when you start looking at your emotions, your thoughts, and your daily patterns, you begin to understand your energy in a completely different way.
And that understanding is powerful.
Because it gives you the ability to change things,
Not all at once,
but slowly,
and gently.
in a way that feels real and sustainable,
And that's how you begin to feel less tired.
and more like yourself again.
At some point, after noticing all these patterns, your habits, your thoughts, your emotions, a deeper realization begins to form. And it's something many people don't expect.
What is it?
That feeling tired all the time is not a sign that you are weak. It's often a sign that something in your life is out of balance.
That's such an important shift, because instead of blaming yourself, you start listening to what your body and mind are trying to tell you.
Exactly, because your tiredness is not the problem. It's a message.
A message that something needs attention, something needs care, something needs to change.
I remember when I first started seeing my tiredness that way. It changed how I responded to it.
In what way?
Instead of pushing myself harder, I became more curious, more patient, more willing to understand what was really going on.
That's such a different approach because most of us are used to pushing through exhaustion instead of understanding it.
Yes, and pushing through can work for a short time, but eventually it catches up with you.
And when it does, it feels even heavier.
Exactly. So instead of ignoring the tiredness, I started asking myself deeper questions.
Like what?
Questions like, what is actually draining me right now? Or what do I really need in this moment?
Those questions require honesty.
They do, and sometimes the answers are not what you expect.
What kind of answers did you find?
Sometimes I realized I didn't need more work or more effort. I needed rest or space or even a break from certain responsibilities.
That can be hard to accept.
It can, especially if you're used to being productive all the time.
But ignoring that need only makes the tiredness stronger.
Exactly. And over time, I began to respect my energy instead of constantly fighting against it.
That's such a powerful idea, respecting your energy.
Yes, because your energy is limited and how you use it matters.
I think many people treat their energy as something unlimited, like it will always be there no matter what.
But the reality is, it needs care.
Just like your body needs rest and your mind needs calm, your energy needs balance.
And balance doesn't mean doing less, it means doing things differently.
In a way that supports you instead of draining you.
Exactly.
I remember when I started creating small routines that supported my energy, not in a strict or rigid way, but in a gentle, consistent way.
What kind of routines?
Simple things like starting my morning without my phone, taking short breaks during the day, and giving myself time in the evening to truly relax.
That sounds simple, but I imagine it made a big difference.
It really did, because those small routines created a sense of stability, and that stability reduced my mental and emotional fatigue.
That's such an important point, because when your day feels chaotic, it naturally drains your energy.
Yes, but when your day has a gentle structure, it supports you instead of overwhelming you.
I experienced something similar when I started prioritizing sleep in a more intentional way.
What changed for you?
I stopped treating sleep as something optional or flexible, and I started seeing it as a priority.
That's a big shift.
Yes, because instead of staying up late without thinking, I became more aware of how my choices were affecting my energy the next day.
And that awareness changes your behavior.
Exactly. And over time, my energy became more stable. Not perfect, but more consistent.
And consistency is what really matters.
Yes, because energy is not about feeling amazing all the time. It's about feeling balanced most of the time.
That's such a realistic and helpful way to look at it.
I think another important part of this journey is patience.
Definitely.
Because when you've been feeling tired for a long time, you can't expect everything to change overnight.
It takes time to rebuild your energy.
And that's okay.
Yes, because real lasting change is always gradual.
And the goal is not perfection,
But progress.
small, steady progress.
I think it's also important to be kind to yourself during this process.
Absolutely. Because if you approach it with pressure or frustration, you're only adding more stress.
And stress is one of the biggest energy drains.
So instead of saying, "Why am I always tired?"
You can gently ask, what do I need right now?
that small change in language can create a big change in how you feel.
Because it shifts you from judgment to understanding.
And understanding leads to better choices,
And better choices lead to better energy.
step by step,
Day by day.
moment by moment.
And slowly, without forcing it,
You begin to feel different,
lighter,
clearer,
more present.
more like yourself.
And that's the real goal.
Not just to have more energy.
But to feel connected to your life again. When you think about everything we've talked about, it becomes clear that feeling tired all the time is not just one simple problem with one simple solution.
Yes, it's more like a collection of small patterns, small habits, and small thoughts that slowly shape how you feel every single day.
And the most important thing to understand is that nothing is wrong with you, because many people carry this quiet exhaustion without even realizing where it's coming from.
Exactly. And once you stop seeing it as a personal failure and start seeing it as something you can understand and change, everything begins to feel a little lighter.
Because now, instead of feeling stuck, you feel curious. And curiosity is a much better place to begin than frustration.
I think that's where real change starts, not from forcing yourself to suddenly become more energetic, but from gently observing your life and asking, what can I adjust?
And those adjustments don't have to be big, because in fact, the smallest changes are often the most powerful when they are consistent.
like giving yourself a few quiet minutes in the morning before looking at your phone, or taking a short break during the day where you're not consuming anything, just breathing and allowing your mind to rest.
Or even something as simple as being a little kinder to yourself when you feel low on energy, instead of pushing yourself harder and adding more pressure.
Because the way you treat yourself matters more than you think, and your energy responds to that kindness.
I remember how different I started to feel when I stopped trying to fix everything at once and instead focused on one small habit at a time.
That's such an important approach because trying to change everything at once can actually create more stress and make you feel even more tired.
Exactly, but when you focus on one small change, it feels manageable, and that sense of manageability gives you confidence.
And that confidence gives you energy.
It's like a quiet cycle. Small change leads to a small improvement, and that improvement encourages you to keep going.
And over time, those small changes begin to add up in a way that feels natural, not forced.
I think it's also important to accept that some days will still feel tiring, and that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong.
Yes, because life itself has natural ups and downs, and your energy will reflect that.
But the difference is that now you understand your energy better, so those low energy days don't feel as confusing or overwhelming.
They feel temporary and manageable.
And that makes a huge difference in how you experience your day.
I also believe that when you start taking care of your energy, you begin to notice something else. You become more present in your life.
Yes, because when you're not constantly tired, you can actually feel the moments you're living.
You can enjoy simple things like a conversation, a quiet walk, or even just a calm moment with yourself.
And those moments, even though they seem small, are what make life feel meaningful.
Not the constant rush, not the endless busyness, but the moments where you feel connected and alive.
So if you're listening right now and you've been feeling tired for a long time, I want to say this to you very gently.
You don't need to change your entire life overnight.
You don't need to become a completely different person.
You just need to start noticing and start caring for your energy in small, simple ways.
Maybe tomorrow morning you begin your day a little slower without reaching for your phone immediately.
Or maybe during your day you take one real break where you allow yourself to pause instead of constantly moving.
Or maybe tonight you give yourself a little more space to unwind instead of filling every moment with noise.
These are small choices, but they matter more than they seem.
Because every small choice is a step toward feeling better.
And those steps, even if they are slow, are still moving you forward.
And if something in this conversation felt familiar to you, if you saw yourself in these moments we talked about,
then that's already the beginning of awareness.
And awareness is where change begins.
So take one small idea from this episode, just one,
and try it in your own life.
Notice how it feels, without pressure, without expectations.
Just with curiosity.
Just with curiosity.
And if you'd like, share it with us.
Tell us in the comments, what is one thing that you think might be draining your energy right now?
And what is one small change you would like to try after listening to this?
Your experience might help someone else feel understood and a little less alone.
And if you found this conversation helpful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Because we're here to support you, step by step, in improving not just your English, but also your daily life.
This is Daniel.
And this is Emma.
And you've been listening to us.
Take care of yourself, and we'll see you again soon.